Sometimes the most important decisions we make come from the heart, not the head. When 42-year-old Evelyn Morrison saw the massive black dog at Harper's auction house, something deep inside told her this creature needed her as much as she needed him. The whole town thought she'd lost her mind. Here was a woman barely scraping by, bidding her last savings on a dog that stood taller than most ponies. The beast had scars across his face and eyes that had seen too much pain. But Evelyn saw something else, a loyal companion who'd been waiting for someone to believe in him. What she didn't expect was how quickly everything would change. Within days, the dog started acting strange. He'd disappear into the mountains and come back with dirt on his paws, leading her to places she'd never seen before. Old mining trails, hidden caves, forgotten paths that seemed to hold secrets from long ago. But what was this giant dog really searching for in those Colorado mountains? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered planks of Evelyn Morrison's front porch as she sat watching the massive black dog explore his new home. 3 days had passed since the auction, and she still couldn't quite believe what she'd done. Her savings, all $47 of it, gone in a moment of pure impulse. But watching the gentle giant sniff carefully around her modest cabin, she felt something she hadn't experienced in the 2 years since Thomas died. Hope. Evelyn's cabin sat on the edge of Silver Creek Valley, where the Colorado Territory stretched endlessly toward snow-capped peaks. The structure itself told the story of a woman making do with what she had. Weathered pine logs chinked with mud and moss, a roof patched in 3 different materials, and windows that let in more cold than light. But it was home, and it was hers. At least until the bank decided otherwise. The dog, she'd taken to calling him Bear for his enormous size, moved with surprising grace for his bulk. He stood nearly 4 feet at the shoulder, with a coat so black it seemed to absorb sunlight. His head was massive, broader than her own torso, and his paws left prints in her garden soil that looked more like small craters. Yet for all his intimidating presence, his dark eyes held an intelligence that made her stomach flutter with nervous excitement. "You're not like other dogs, are you?" she murmured, watching as he systematically investigated every corner of her property. He moved with purpose, as if mapping the territory rather than simply exploring. When he reached the old shed where Thomas had kept his mining equipment, Bear stopped and turned to look directly at her. The intensity of his gaze made her shiver. Thomas Morrison had been a dreamer and a digger, always chasing stories of lost claims and forgotten fortunes in these mountains. His weathered leather journal still sat on her kitchen table, filled with sketches of mining shafts, maps of unexplored valleys, and notes written in his careful hand. She'd read every page a dozen times since his death, trying to understand what had driven him to spend their final years scratching at rocks instead of building a proper farm. The journal's pages were yellow with age and rough handling. The leather cover worn smooth by countless hours in Thomas's calloused hands. Inside, his neat drawings showed mining equipment, geological formations, and hand-drawn maps of areas she'd never seen. Some entries spoke of old-timers' tales and Spanish gold, while others detailed more practical matters of claim jumping and territorial disputes. But the most intriguing entries were the ones that mentioned strange occurrences. Dogs that seemed to know where ore was hidden, compasses that pointed toward treasure instead of north, and miners who swore the mountains themselves had consciousness. "Evelyn Morrison, what in the Lord's name have you done?" The sharp voice belonged to Martha Webb, her nearest neighbor and the closest thing to a friend she had left in Silver Creek. Martha approached across the meadow with her characteristic brisk stride, grey hair pinned severely back and her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. Behind her walked her son Joseph, a boy of 15 who'd grown tall and gangly over the past year. "Good morning, Martha," Evelyn said, rising from her chair. Bear immediately moved to position himself between her and the approaching visitors, not aggressive, but clearly protective. "I'd like you to meet Bear." Martha stopped short when she saw the dog's full size. "Sweet mercy above. That's not a dog, Evelyn. That's a small horse with fur." She eyed Bear warily. "Joseph, stay back." But Joseph was already captivated. "He's magnificent, Mrs. Morrison. Look at the size of him. Bet he could pull a cart better than old Murphy's mule." "That's exactly what I'm afraid of," Martha said. "Evelyn, honey, you can barely afford to feed yourself. How are you going to manage with that beast? He'll eat more in a week than you do in a month." The criticism stung because it was true. Evelyn had been living on beans and cornbread for the better part of 6 months, selling off Thomas's tools one by one to pay for basic supplies. The bank held a note on her property that would come due at the end of summer, and she had no earthly idea how she'd make that payment. But looking at Bear, watching how he seemed to understand every word being spoken, she felt certain she'd made the right choice. "I'll manage," she said quietly. "There's something special about him, Martha. I can feel it." Martha's expression softened slightly. She'd been widowed herself for 5 years and understood the loneliness that could drive a person to desperate measures. "Well, he's certainly impressive, but impressive don't pay bills or fill bellies." As if to prove her point, Bear suddenly lifted his massive head and stared intently toward the eastern ridge. His ears pricked forward, and a low rumble emerged. From his chest, not quite a growl but a sound of alert attention. Evelyn followed his gaze, but saw nothing unusual among the pine trees and granite outcroppings. "What is it, boy?" she asked. Bear maintained his vigil for several long moments before relaxing slightly, but his eyes remained fixed on the distant ridge, and Evelyn noticed how his nostrils flared, as if catching a scent carried on the mountain wind. "Strange behavior for a dog," Martha observed, "almost like he's standing guard." Joseph had been studying Bear with the intense focus only teenagers could muster. "Mrs. Morrison, where did he come from? I mean, before the auction. Dogs this size don't just appear from nowhere." It was a good question, and one that had been nagging at Evelyn since she'd brought Bear home. Harper's auction house dealt mostly in livestock and farming equipment, not exotic animals. Yet there had been no explanation offered for Bear's presence. No former owner stepping forward to bid against her or claim the dog had been sold in error. "The auctioneer said he belonged to an estate," she replied. "Someone who died without family to claim their belongings. But he didn't say who." "Mighty strange for someone to die without anyone knowing about a dog this size," Martha mused. "Word gets around in these mountains. People talk about unusual things." As if summoned by their discussion, the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed across the valley. A lone rider was making his way up the winding path that led to Evelyn's cabin, moving at an easy pace that suggested familiarity with the terrain. Bear's attention immediately focused on the newcomer, but his body language remained calm rather than defensive. The rider proved to be Samuel Cross, a man Evelyn knew by reputation, though they'd rarely spoken. He was perhaps 50 years old, with silver threading through his dark beard and the weathered complexion of someone who spent his life outdoors. He'd been Thomas's friend in the early days, before her husband had become consumed with his mining obsession. "Morning, Evelyn," Samuel called as he dismounted near her gate. His horse was a sturdy bay mare that showed no fear of Bear despite the dog's imposing presence. "Heard you made quite a splash at Harper's the other day." "News travels fast," she replied, wondering what Samuel wanted. He lived a day's ride north, up near the old settlement of Copper Ridge, and rarely ventured this far south without good reason. Samuel approached slowly, his eyes fixed on Bear with an expression Evelyn couldn't quite read. It wasn't fear exactly, but something deeper, recognition perhaps, or remembrance. "Mind if I take a closer look at your new companion?" "Of course not." Samuel stopped about 6 feet from Bear and simply stood there, studying the dog's face and posture. After a long moment, he extended one weathered hand, palm up. To Evelyn's amazement, Bear immediately stepped forward and gently sniffed Samuel's fingers, then allowed the man to scratch behind his ears. "Well, I'll be damned," Samuel murmured. "You remember me, don't you, old friend?" "You know this dog?" Evelyn asked, her heart beginning to race. Samuel nodded slowly, never taking his eyes off Bear. "His name isn't Bear, Evelyn. It's Titan, and he belonged to my brother Marcus." He paused, his voice growing heavy with old grief. "Marcus disappeared in these mountains 3 years ago, and we never found hide nor hair of him. But Titan here, he's been waiting all this time for the right person to claim him." The revelation hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She looked at Bear Titan with new understanding, seeing in his intelligent eyes not just loyalty but patience, as if he'd been biding his time until the moment was right. "But why me? Why did he let me bid on him? Why didn't you?" "Because I wasn't supposed to," Samuel said simply. "Titan's got his own sense of who he belongs with, and it seems he's chosen you." He straightened, his expression growing serious. "But Evelyn, there's things you need to know about my brother, about what he was doing up in those mountains when he vanished. Things that might explain why Titan's been acting so strange since you brought him home." Martha had been listening with growing concern. "Samuel Cross, you're talking in riddles. What kind of things?" Samuel glanced around the group, his eyes settling finally on Evelyn. "Thomas never told you about the partnership, did he? About the work he and Marcus were doing together?" Evelyn's blood ran cold. "What partnership?" "They'd found something, Evelyn. Something big. And the day before Marcus disappeared, he told me they were close to bringing it all to light." Samuel's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "That journal Thomas kept, the one I know you've been reading, it's only half the story. Marcus had the other half, and when he vanished, that knowledge went with him." Titan chose that moment to pad over to Evelyn and press his massive head against her side, as if offering comfort or claiming protection. She rested her hand on his broad skull, feeling the warmth of his fur and the steady rhythm of his breathing. "What kind of knowledge?" she asked. "The kind that gets a man killed," Samuel replied grimly, "and the kind that might get you killed too if you're not careful. These mountains hold secrets, Evelyn, old secrets, and Titan here, he knows where. Some of them are buried." As if to emphasize Samuel's words, Titan lifted his head and again focused his attention on the eastern ridge. This time, Evelyn caught a glimpse of movement among the trees, a flash of color that might have been clothing or equipment. Someone was watching them, and judging by Titan's reaction, it wasn't the first time. "I think," Samuel said quietly, "it's time you learned the truth about what your husband was really searching for up there, and why Titan's been waiting so patiently for someone brave enough to help him finish what Marcus started." The mountain wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of pine and something else, something that made Titan's nostrils flare and his muscles tense beneath Evelyn's hand. Whatever secrets these mountains held, they were stirring to life again. And somehow, through a simple act of compassion at an auction house, Evelyn Morrison had become part of something far larger and more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Evelyn felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. The choice she'd made 3 days ago hadn't just brought her a companion. It had set in motion events that would test every ounce of courage she possessed. But looking into Titan's wise, patient eyes, she found herself ready to face whatever lay ahead. That evening, as purple shadows stretched across Silver Creek Valley, Evelyn found herself unable to concentrate on her usual routines. Samuel's revelations had shaken her understanding of everything she thought she knew about Thomas and his obsession with the mountains. She'd prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread, but the food sat untouched on her plate, while her mind churned with questions. Titan had refused to come inside when darkness fell. Instead, he positioned himself on the front porch, his massive frame silhouetted against the star-filled sky. Every few minutes, he would rise and pace to the edge of the porch, staring intently into the darkness before returning to his vigil. His behavior was making Evelyn increasingly nervous. Around midnight, she gave up any pretense of sleep and joined him outside. The mountain air was crisp and thin, carrying sounds that seemed amplified in the stillness. The distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of wind through pine needles, the soft babble of Silver Creek as it wound its way through the valley floor. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, settling into the wooden chair beside him. "What are you watching for?" Titan's response was immediate. He rose to his feet and walked deliberately to the front steps, then turned to look back at her with unmistakable purpose. When she didn't move, he returned and gently took her wrist in his massive jaws, applying just enough pressure to encourage her to stand. "You want me to follow you?" she asked. "In the dark?" His tail wagged once, and he released her wrist to walk again toward the steps. This time he descended into the yard and looked back expectantly. Evelyn hesitated. Every instinct told her to stay safely inside her cabin, to wait for daylight, before venturing into the wilderness with a dog she'd known for less than a week. But something in Titan's demeanor convinced her this wasn't a casual midnight stroll. He was trying to show her something important. "All right," she said quietly, reaching for the oil lantern she kept by the door, "but we're not going far." Titan immediately set off across the meadow behind her cabin, moving with confident strides despite the darkness. His pale eyes seemed to catch and reflect the lantern light, giving him an almost supernatural appearance as he glided through the tall grass. Evelyn followed, her boots crunching softly on frost-stiffened vegetation. They climbed steadily for perhaps 20 minutes, following no trail that Evelyn could discern. Titan navigated between boulders and fallen logs with the assurance of someone who knew every inch of the terrain. When they finally stopped, they were standing before what appeared to be a jumble of rocks and scrub brush on a steep hillside. Titan pushed through the brush and disappeared. Evelyn heard his claws scraping against stone, and when she followed with her lantern, she discovered they were at the entrance to an old mining shaft. The opening was partially concealed by years of accumulated debris, but it was clearly man-made, carved into the living rock with tools and determination. "How did you know this was here?" she breathed. Titan had already disappeared into the darkness beyond her lantern's reach. She heard him moving deeper into the tunnel, his claws clicking against stone, then silence. "Titan," she called softly, "come back here." A moment later, he reappeared carrying something in his jaws. He dropped the object at her feet and sat back, watching expectantly as she held the lantern closer to examine his find. It was a leather map case, old and weathered, but still intact. The leather was stained and cracked, but someone had taken care to seal it against moisture. With trembling fingers, Evelyn opened the case and withdrew a folded parchment covered in Thomas's familiar handwriting. But this wasn't like the sketches and notes in his journal. This map was detailed and precise, showing sections of the mountain. Range she recognized, and others that were completely unfamiliar. Strange symbols marked various locations, some that looked like mining claims, others that defied easy interpretation. And in the margins, notes written in a different hand, presumably Marcus Cross's, provided additional details and coordinates. One notation, circled in red ink, caught her attention. "Spanish Creek, 3rd marker stone, trust only the dog." Below it, in Thomas's writing, "Titan knows the way, follow him when the time comes." "Oh my God," Evelyn whispered. They knew. Somehow, they both knew this would happen. Titan whined softly and padded back toward the tunnel entrance. But instead of leaving, he began digging at a specific spot near the opening, his powerful claws sending dirt and small rocks flying. Within minutes, he had uncovered something else. A metal box buried just beneath the surface. The box was heavy and secured with a simple clasp. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, Evelyn found a collection of items that made her heart race. There were more maps, these showing underground passages and hidden chambers. a leather pouch containing what appeared to be gold nuggets. And most disturbing of all, a letter addressed to whoever finds this cash. By the flickering lantern light, she read Marcus Cross's final message. If you are reading this, then something has happened to me, and Titan has led you to this place. The dog is more than he appears. He has been trained to recognize those who can be trusted with what we have discovered. Thomas Morrison was my partner in this endeavor, and if Titan has chosen you, then you must be connected to Thomas in some way. The truth is this: these mountains hold riches beyond imagination, but they are guarded by forces that most would not understand. We have found evidence of Spanish gold mines that predate any official claims, and the locations are marked on the maps contained here. But more than gold, we have discovered something that defies explanation. Passages and chambers that seem to shift and change, as if the mountain itself is alive. Titan is no ordinary dog. He was born in these mountains, and his bloodline carries knowledge passed down through generations. He knows where the true treasures lie, and he knows how to avoid the dangers that guard them. Trust him with your life, because that trust may be all that stands between you and those who would kill for what we have found. Be warned, there are others who seek these treasures, men without conscience who will stop at nothing to claim what rightfully belongs to the mountain itself. They killed me to silence what I knew, but they could not catch Titan. He has been waiting for the right person to continue our work. If you choose to follow this path, remember, the mountain rewards courage but punishes greed. Take only what you need, give back more than you take, and always listen to the dog. He sees things we cannot see, knows things we cannot know. The first location on the map will test your resolve. If you survive it, then perhaps you are worthy of the greater secrets that lie ahead. But know this: once you begin this journey, there is no turning back. The mountain will mark you as its own, for better or worse. May God have mercy on your soul. Marcus Cross, October 15th, 1879. Evelyn's hands shook as she folded the letter and returned it to the metal box. The date was significant. Thomas had died in November of 1880, more than a year after Marcus had written this warning, which meant her husband had continued their dangerous work alone, with only Titan as his companion and guide. "That's why you were at the auction," she said to the dog, who was watching her with those impossibly intelligent eyes. "You weren't abandoned. You were waiting for someone connected to Thomas who would be brave enough or foolish enough to follow where you led." Titan's tail wagged once, and he gently took her free hand in his mouth, tugging her toward the tunnel exit. As they made their way back down the mountainside, Evelyn's mind raced with the implications of what she'd discovered. The maps in her possession showed locations of potential treasure that could solve all her financial problems and secure her future. But Marcus's warning about unseen dangers and ruthless men willing to kill for gold made her stomach clench with fear. By the time they reached her cabin, the eastern sky was beginning to show the first faint traces of dawn. Evelyn sat on her front porch with the metal box in her lap and Titan pressed against her side, trying to process everything that had happened in the space of a few hours. She thought about her options. The safe choice would be to rebury the box, forget what she'd learned, and try to continue her simple existence until the bank foreclosed on her property. But safety had never been Thomas's way, and it seemed that fate, or Titan's supernatural instincts, had chosen her to carry on his work. The alternative was to follow the maps, trust in a dog's mysterious knowledge, and venture into mountains that apparently held both unimaginable wealth and deadly peril. It was the kind of choice that would define the rest of her life, however long that might be. As the sun crested the eastern ridge, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber, Evelyn Morrison made her decision. She would follow Titan into the unknown, not because she was fearless, but because some things were worth facing fear to achieve. Thomas had believed in these mountains strongly enough to die for their secrets. Marcus Cross had trained a dog to carry on their work. Now it was her turn to prove worthy of their trust. "All right, boy," she said quietly, scratching behind Titan's ears. "Show me what they died for." Titan's response was immediate. He rose to his feet, walked to the edge of the porch, and looked back at her with unmistakable purpose. The first location on the map was a place called Spanish Creek, and according to Marcus's notations, it lay 2 days' journey deeper into the mountains than any place she'd ever ventured. The adventure Thomas had dreamed of was about to begin, and Evelyn Morrison, widow, survivor, and now reluctant treasure hunter, was ready to discover what secrets the Colorado Territory had been hiding in its ancient stones. The morning sun had barely cleared the ridge when Evelyn began her preparations for what might be the most dangerous journey of her life. She packed carefully, balancing necessity against the weight she could carry. Dried beans, hardtack, coffee, her father's old Colt revolver with a handful of cartridges, blankets, and the precious maps wrapped in oiled cloth. Every item had to earn its place in her worn leather saddlebags. Titan watched her preparations with the intensity of a general reviewing battle plans. Several times he approached her pack and sniffed particular items, occasionally nudging certain supplies with his massive head as if offering approval or concern. When she hesitated over whether to bring Thomas's mining tools, Titan's behavior became more insistent, ultimately leading her to the shed and stopping before a specific pickaxe. "This one?" she asked, and his tail wagged once, apparently his signal for agreement. The tool was heavier than the others, with an ornate silver compass embedded in its handle. Thomas had always claimed it was his lucky pick, though Evelyn had never understood why. Now, examining it more closely, she noticed that the compass needle didn't point north. Instead, it seemed to drift slowly in different directions, as if drawn by something other than magnetic force. By mid-morning, they were climbing steadily into terrain Evelyn had never explored. The first location marked on Marcus's map lay northwest of her property, following a series of ridgelines that would eventually lead to the headwaters of Spanish Creek. Titan set their pace, steady but not hurried, with frequent stops to listen and scent the wind. The dog's behavior fascinated her. He moved through the wilderness with the confidence of someone following a familiar route, yet his constant vigilance suggested they were not alone in these mountains. Twice he led her away from what appeared to be easier paths, guiding them, instead through dense thickets or around seemingly random rock formations. Each detour proved justified when they later passed the remains of old campsites or discovered boot prints in muddy ground, evidence that other travelers had used the more obvious routes recently. "You're keeping us away from other people," she observed during their midday rest beside a mountain stream. "But how do you know they're dangerous?" Titan's response was to pad over to the stream bank and begin digging. Within minutes, he had uncovered a wooden stake driven deep into the ground, a survey marker that someone had deliberately hidden beneath several inches of soil and fallen leaves. Evelyn examined the marker carefully. It bore recent tool marks and initials she didn't recognize. BH, 1882. Someone had been surveying this area within the past few months, and they'd gone to considerable trouble to conceal their work. "Claim jumpers," she murmured, understanding dawning. "Someone's been mapping these mountains, looking for the same things Thomas and Marcus found." The realization sent a chill through her, despite the warm afternoon sun. If other treasure hunters were already working the area, then Marcus's warnings about dangerous men took on new urgency. She was not just searching for lost gold. She was potentially walking into someone else's carefully laid plans. They reached the first mapped location as evening shadows began to stretch across the mountain slopes. Spanish Creek proved to be little more than a seasonal stream, running clear and cold through a narrow valley bounded by granite cliffs on either side. According to the map, they needed to find the third marker stone somewhere along its course. Titan had no difficulty locating their destination. He led Evelyn upstream for perhaps half a mile before stopping beside what appeared to be an ordinary boulder. But when she examined it closely, she discovered carved symbols weathered almost smooth by decades of mountain weather, markings that matched notations on Marcus's map. "This is it," she breathed. "But what are we supposed to find here?" Titan began digging again, this time at the base of the marker stone. His powerful claws sent dirt flying until he uncovered a flat piece of granite that had been carefully fitted into the ground like a lid. Beneath it lay a shallow cavity containing another metal box, smaller than the first, but equally well preserved. Inside this cache, Evelyn found an object that made her heart race. An ornate silver compass. Its face, decorated with intricate engravings, and its needle pointing steadily toward a direction that had nothing to do with magnetic north. The craftsmanship was exquisite, suggesting Spanish or Mexican origin, and the silver had the soft glow of precious metal. A note wrapped around the compass explained its significance. "This compass will guide you to the hidden places when the mountain is ready to reveal them. But beware, it will also lead others to you if they know its nature. Trust only those the dog accepts, and remember that greed blinds men to danger." As if responding to the compass's presence, Titan suddenly raised his head and growled softly. In the distance, Evelyn could hear the faint sound of horses moving through the forest, multiple riders approaching their location. "We need to go," she whispered, quickly repacking the compass and covering their excavation. Titan was already moving, leading her away from the creek and up a steep slope that offered concealment among a grove of aspen trees. From their hidden position, they watched as 3 men on horseback emerged from the downstream trail and began examining the area around the marker stone. Even at a distance, Evelyn could see that these were not casual travelers. They moved with the systematic thoroughness of men searching for something specific, and they were heavily armed. The leader, a tall man with a distinctive black hat, dismounted and began studying the ground where Titan had been digging. "Damn!" The man called to his companions. "Someone's been here recently. The dirt's fresh and there are dog tracks everywhere." "Could be that Morrison woman," replied one of the others. "Samuel Cross was seen talking to her yesterday. Word is, she bought some unusual animal at Harper's auction. Then we need to find her before she stumbles onto something she shouldn't." The leader's voice carried clearly in the thin mountain air. "Benjamin Harper wants this territory clean before we move the main operation up here. No witnesses, no complications." Evelyn's blood ran cold. These men knew her name, knew about her acquisition of Titan, and spoke casually about eliminating witnesses. Whatever conspiracy had claimed Marcus Cross's life was still active, and she had walked directly into its path. The riders spent another 20 minutes examining the area before mounting up and heading further upstream. Titan waited until their hoofbeats had faded completely before leading Evelyn back down to retrieve their supplies. "We can't go back to the cabin," she realized. "They know where I live, and they're not planning to ask politely about what I've found." Titan's agreement was evident in his behavior. Instead of heading toward home, he began climbing toward higher ground, following trails that seemed to exist only in his memory. As darkness fell, they made camp in a sheltered alcove beneath an overhanging cliff, where a small fire would be invisible from the valley below, sitting beside the flickering flames, with Titan's reassuring bulk pressed against her side. Evelyn examined the silver compass more carefully. Its needle pointed steadily northeast, toward a section of the mountains she'd never explored. According to Marcus's map, that direction would eventually lead to something marked as the Proving Ground, a location that apparently held greater treasures and greater dangers than anything they'd encountered so far. "What have I gotten myself into?" she wondered aloud. Titan's response was to gently place one enormous paw on her arm, a gesture so human-like in its intent to comfort that. She found herself smiling despite their dangerous situation. "At least I'm not alone," she said, scratching behind his ears. "Whatever Thomas and Marcus discovered up here, we're going to see it through together." The silver compass gleamed in the firelight, its needle never wavering from its mysterious destination. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new revelations, but tonight she had warmth, companionship, and the first tangible proof that their quest was more than mere fantasy. The mountain held its secrets close, but with Titan as her guide and the compass as her key, Evelyn Morrison was beginning to unlock mysteries that had been hidden for generations. Dawn brought the sound of rushing water and the compass needle pointing steadily toward a distant ridge where morning mist clung to ancient pines. Evelyn woke to find Titan already alert, his dark eyes fixed on something in the valley below. Following his gaze, she spotted smoke rising from what appeared to be a small camp about 2 miles downstream. Too close for comfort. "Our friends." "From yesterday?" she whispered. Titan's low growl confirmed her suspicion. The men hunting them had made camp nearby, probably hoping to pick up their trail at first light. It was time to move, and move quickly. The silver compass led them higher, into the mountains, following ridgelines that offered both concealment and clear views of the territory behind them. By mid-morning, they had climbed above the tree line into a landscape of granite peaks and alpine meadows, where every footstep echoed in the thin air. Here, Titan's behavior changed dramatically. He moved more slowly, pausing frequently to test the wind and examine the ground with unusual care. When they reached a broad plateau scattered with weathered boulders, he stopped completely and began a systematic search of the area. "What is it, boy?" Evelyn asked, checking the compass. Its needle spun wildly for a moment before settling on a new direction, due east toward a formation of red rock that jutted from the plateau like ancient teeth. Titan had found what he was looking for. He stood beside a boulder that appeared identical to dozens of others, but when Evelyn joined him, she noticed something that made her pulse quicken. Hidden beneath a thin layer of lichen and weather stains was a carved symbol, the same Spanish markings they'd seen on the previous marker stone. This time, the cache was larger and required both of them working together to uncover it. Titan's powerful claws loosened the earth while Evelyn used her hands to carefully extract what proved to be a genuine prospector's gold pan, dented and stained with use, but unmistakably authentic. "Someone's been mining up here," she said, examining the pan's worn surface. "Recently, by the look of it." Her assumption proved correct when she carried the pan to a nearby seasonal stream and tried the techniques Thomas had taught her during their early years together. Within minutes, the pan's bottom gleamed with genuine gold flakes, small but unmistakably real. "My God," she breathed, "there's actually gold in these streams." But Titan's reaction to her discovery was unexpected. Instead of excitement, he seemed anxious, pacing restlessly and frequently looking back toward the way they'd come. His message was clear. They had lingered too long in an exposed position. As if summoned by his concern, the distant sound of gunfire echoed across the plateau. Not the sharp crack of hunting rifles, but the sustained exchange of men shooting at each other. Someone else had found the treasure hunter's camp, and the encounter was not going well for one side or the other. "We need to get off this plateau," Evelyn said, hastily repacking their supplies. The gold flakes went into a small leather pouch that she secured in her deepest pocket, while the compass continued to point toward the red rock formation. Their descent from the plateau took them into a maze of narrow canyons and hidden valleys that seemed designed by nature to confuse unwary travelers. But Titan navigated the labyrinth with the confidence of someone following a well-known route, leading Evelyn through passages so narrow they had to proceed single file and across rocky ledges that would have been terrifying without her guide's reassuring presence. By afternoon, they had reached a sheltered valley where a substantial creek wound between stands of cottonwood and willow. Here, hidden among the trees, they discovered evidence of previous occupation, the remains of old mining operations that had been abandoned so long ago that forest vegetation had largely reclaimed them. But these weren't ordinary mining claims. The excavations were too sophisticated, the equipment remains too advanced for simple prospecting. Someone had invested serious money and expertise in extracting whatever lay hidden beneath this valley floor. Titan led her to what appeared to be the operation's centerpiece, a shaft sunk deep into the hillside and reinforced with timber that still showed the marks of precision craftsmanship. Unlike the rough prospector holes scattered throughout Colorado Territory, this excavation had been planned and executed with the skill of professional engineers. This is what Thomas and Marcus found, she realized. This is why they needed that. A map, a wooden sign, weathered but still legible, confirmed her suspicion. San Miguel Mining Consortium, Estia 1847, authorized personnel only. The date made her stomach clench. This operation predated American territorial claims by more than 30 years. Whatever legal ownership existed here, it certainly didn't belong to the men who had been hunting her. Deeper exploration of the abandoned workings revealed something even more significant. A camp that had been occupied within the past few months. Recent fire rings, cached supplies, and most disturbing of all, a crude wooden cross marking a fresh grave. Someone had died here recently, and whoever buried them had taken time to carve a simple inscription. MC. He knew the truth. Marcus Cross, Evelyn whispered, her throat tightening with emotion. This is where they killed him. Titan's behavior at the gravesite confirmed her conclusion. He approached the marker with the solemnity of an old friend paying respects, resting, his massive head against the wooden cross for several long moments before returning to her side. But Marcus's death had not ended the story. Hidden beneath a carefully arranged pile of rocks near his grave, they found his final gift to whoever would continue the work, a detailed journal documenting 3 years of systematic exploration and discovery. The journal's entries painted a picture of methodical investigation that had uncovered far more than simple gold deposits. Marcus and Thomas had found evidence of Spanish mining operations that had extracted enormous wealth from these mountains, wealth that had been hidden when political upheaval forced the original miners to abandon their claims. June 15, 1879, one entry read, confirmed the existence of at least 3 major cache sites. The Spanish sealed the entrances before departing, but Titan can locate them by scent. The dog's abilities continue to amaze. He seems to understand the mountain's geography in ways that defy rational explanation. Another entry, dated just weeks before Marcus's death, was more ominous. We are being watched. Benjamin Harper's men have been asking questions in town, offering money for information about unusual mining activity. Must accelerate timeline and secure the main cache before they discover our work. Titan grows more protective each day. I believe he senses the danger better than we do. The journal's final entry, written in Marcus's increasingly shaky handwriting, provided the key to everything. The compass will lead to the proving ground, but only when the mountain judges the seeker worthy. Have trained Titan to recognize those with pure hearts and sufficient courage. If something happens to me, he will choose the next guardian. Pray it is someone who understands that this treasure comes with sacred responsibilities. As afternoon, shadows lengthened across the hidden valley. Evelyn sat beside Marcus's grave, trying to absorb the magnitude of what she'd inherited. This wasn't just about gold or financial security. She had become the guardian of secrets that had been protected for generations, secrets that powerful men were willing to kill for. Titan seemed to sense her overwhelming thoughts. He padded over and gently placed his head in her lap, offering the kind of comfort that transcended species. His dark eyes held infinite patience, as if he understood the weight of decision she was carrying. You've been waiting for someone to finish what they started, she said softly. But what if I'm not strong enough? What if I make the wrong choices? His response was immediate. He rose and walked to the journal, then returned with a specific page held carefully in his teeth. The entry he'd selected contained Marcus's thoughts about courage. True bravery is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act righteously despite terror. The mountain will test anyone who seeks its treasures, but it rewards those who prove worthy of its trust. The silver compass, when she checked it again, was pointing toward a new destination, southeast, deeper into the heart of the mountain range where no legitimate mining claims had ever been filed. According to Marcus's maps, that direction led to what he'd called the Proving Ground, a place where the Spanish had concealed their greatest treasures and deadliest traps. Night was approaching, but Evelyn made her decision. They would make camp here in the protected valley, honor Marcus's sacrifice by spending one night beside his grave, and then follow the compass toward whatever awaited them in the mountain's hidden heart. As she prepared their simple meal over a small fire, Titan maintained his vigil at the valley's entrance. His ears remained alert for sounds of pursuit, but his body language had relaxed slightly. Perhaps the gunfire they'd heard earlier had resolved the immediate threat, or perhaps the mountain itself was providing them sanctuary. Either way, tomorrow would bring the next stage of their journey into a realm where gold and danger walked hand in hand, where ancient secrets waited to be uncovered, and where one woman and her extraordinary companion would discover whether they possessed the courage to unlock mysteries that had remained hidden since before Colorado Territory existed. The proving ground awaited, and with it, the final test of everything Marcus Cross and Thomas Morrison had died to protect. The proving ground revealed itself at dawn as a place that defied natural explanation. Following the silver compass through a landscape that grew increasingly surreal, Evelyn and Titan emerged from a narrow canyon to find themselves standing before a massive ravine carved deep into the mountain's heart. But this wasn't the work of water or geological upheaval. The walls were too smooth, the angles too precise, as if some ancient force had carved a perfect wound into the living rock. "Sweet Mary and Joseph," Evelyn breathed, staring into the chasm. What kind of men could have built something like this? The compass needle spun wildly for several moments before settling on a direction that pointed directly down into the ravine's depths. Somewhere far below, morning sunlight glinted off what appeared to be crystalline formations embedded in the rock walls. Titan had found a path, a series of natural ledges and carved footholds that zigzagged down the ravine's eastern wall. The route was treacherous but obviously ancient, worn smooth by centuries of careful use. As they began their descent, Evelyn noticed that the rock face bore markings similar to those they'd found at the cache sites, but these were larger and more elaborate, telling stories in symbols she couldn't read. The descent took nearly 2 hours, with frequent stops to rest and marvel at their surroundings. The deeper they went, the more obvious it became that this place had been shaped by human hands working in harmony with natural forces. Water seeped through the rock walls to form pools that reflected light in impossible ways, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with an energy that made the hair on Evelyn's arms stand upright. At the ravine's bottom, they found themselves in a circular chamber perhaps 100 feet across, its walls rising straight up toward a narrow slice of sky far above. But the chamber's most remarkable feature wasn't its size. It was the crystal formation that dominated its center like some fantastic altar. The crystals rose from the chamber floor in spiraling towers that caught and reflected the filtered sunlight, creating patterns of light that danced across the carved walls. But these weren't ordinary mineral formations. They pulsed with an inner radiance that had nothing to do with reflected light, and their surfaces bore the same symbolic markings found throughout this mysterious complex. "The heart of the mountain," Evelyn whispered, remembering a phrase from Marcus's journal. He wrote about a place where the earth itself came alive. Titan approached the crystal formation with the reverence of someone entering a sacred space. He moved slowly and deliberately, pausing frequently to test the air with his sensitive nose. When he reached the base of the largest crystal spire, he began digging, not frantically as he had at the cache sites, but with careful precision. What emerged from beneath the chamber floor made Evelyn's heart race with anticipation and terror. It was another metal container, but this one was clearly ancient, crafted from silver and decorated with intricate designs that matched the symbols on the walls. When she opened it, the contents took her breath away. Inside lay treasures that belonged in a cathedral or royal treasury, golden chalices encrusted with gems, silver plates bearing religious imagery, and jewelry that spoke of Spanish nobility and ecclesiastical wealth. But more significant than the precious objects was what they represented. This wasn't pirate treasure or mining profits, but sacred artifacts that had been hidden to protect them from desecration. A parchment scroll, remarkably well preserved, provided context in flowing Spanish script. Though her knowledge of the language was limited, Evelyn could make out enough to understand the basic message. These were treasures from missions and churches throughout the Spanish territories, gathered and hidden when political upheaval threatened their safety. But the scroll's most important revelation was its date, 1847, the same year marked on the mining consortium sign they'd found in the valley. The Spanish hadn't abandoned their claims due to political pressure. They had been forced out by American interests who had discovered the extent of the hidden wealth and were willing to use violence to claim it. This is what they killed Marcus for, she realized. Not just gold from mining claims, but centuries of accumulated treasures. Titan's behavior had grown increasingly agitated as she examined the artifacts. He paced restlessly around the chamber's perimeter, pausing frequently to stare up at the narrow opening far above. His message was clear. They were exposed and vulnerable in this enclosed space. As if summoned by his concern, the sound of voices echoed down from the ravine's rim. Multiple men were examining their descent route, and their words carried clearly in the chamber's acoustic peculiarities. "Fresh tracks leading down into the hole," one voice reported. "Looks like a woman and that massive dog everyone's been talking about." "Perfect," came the reply, in an accent Evelyn recognized as belonging to the leader from Spanish Creek. "They've led us right to what we've been searching for. Benjamin Harper will be very pleased." "What about the woman? She's seen too much to let her walk away." "She won't be walking anywhere. This ravine makes a perfect trap, only one way in or out, and we control it. Take your time going down. Let them stew in their own fear for a while." Evelyn's hands shook as she repacked the most portable treasures. The chamber that had seemed like a sanctuary moments before had become a death trap, with armed men controlling. The only exit, she and Titan were caught with evidence of discoveries that powerful people would kill to possess. But Titan wasn't acting like a trapped animal. Instead, he had moved to a section of the chamber wall that appeared solid, but apparently wasn't. He pawed insistently at what looked like natural rock formation, until Evelyn joined him and discovered that the stone surface was actually a clever facade. Behind the false wall lay a passage carved deep into the mountain, a tunnel that headed into darkness, but offered the only alternative to certain death at the hands of their pursuers. The passage was narrow and obviously ancient, but it had been designed for human travel. "Another way out," she whispered gratefully. "Marcus and Thomas knew about this, didn't they? That's why they weren't afraid to explore down here." Titan's tail wagged once before he plunged into the tunnel's darkness. Evelyn followed, carrying her oil lantern and the precious artifacts, leaving behind the beautiful crystal chamber and the voices of men who had come to claim both treasure and her life. The passage twisted and branched like a vast underground maze, but Titan navigated it with the same confidence he'd shown above ground. They climbed steadily, following what appeared to be a route designed to emerge far from the ravine's obvious entrance. Behind them, the voices of their pursuers grew, fainter and more frustrated, as they realized their trap had failed. Ahead lay unknown passages that might lead to freedom or deeper peril. But with sacred treasures in her pack and a supernatural guide leading the way, Evelyn Morrison pressed forward into the mountain's hidden heart, knowing that every step took her further from her old life and deeper into a destiny she was only beginning to understand. The crystal formation's pulsing light faded behind them as they climbed toward whatever revelation awaited in the darkness ahead. The tunnel emerged into daylight at a location that defied Evelyn's understanding of mountain geography. They should have been miles from the ravine entrance, yet she could still hear the distant echoes of their pursuers' frustrated voices. The mountain's internal passages seemed to fold space in ways that challenged rational thought. They found themselves on a ledge overlooking a hidden valley that appeared on none of Marcus's maps. This wasn't the harsh, rocky terrain typical of high-altitude Colorado. Instead, it resembled a secret garden where springs fed lush vegetation and ancient trees grew to impossible heights. The air itself felt different here, warmer and charged, with the same energy they'd experienced in the crystal chamber. "This place shouldn't exist," Evelyn murmured, staring at the impossible landscape spread below them. Titan was already leading her down a path that seemed to have been carved specifically for their arrival. The route was too perfect, too well-maintained to be natural, yet it showed no signs of recent human passage. As they descended into the valley, Evelyn noticed something that made her pulse quicken. Structures hidden among the towering trees, not crude frontier buildings, but sophisticated architecture that spoke of advanced engineering and artistic sensibility. The first structure they encountered was a stone building that could have graced any European city. Its walls were constructed from perfectly fitted blocks, and its windows were filled with glass that caught and reflected the afternoon sunlight in prismatic displays. But what made the building truly remarkable was its obvious age combined with its pristine condition, as if time itself moved differently in this hidden place. "A monastery," she breathed, recognizing religious symbols carved into the stonework. The Spanish built a monastery here. Inside, they discovered a complex that had been abandoned but not forgotten. The rooms were clean and well-maintained, with furniture covered by cloth that showed no signs of decay. Religious artifacts filled carefully arranged displays, and a library contained books and manuscripts that appeared to span centuries of accumulated knowledge. But the monastery's most significant feature was its centerpiece, a chapel where natural light streaming through stained glass windows created patterns that seemed to move and dance independently of the sun's position. At the altar, embedded in the stone itself, was an iron lockbox secured with mechanisms that belonged to no earthly craft. The lockbox's surface was covered with symbols that matched those they'd found throughout their journey, but these were somehow different, more complex, as if they contained layers of meaning beyond simple identification. When Evelyn approached with the silver compass, the device's needle began spinning rapidly before pointing directly at the mysterious container. "It's reacting to something," she observed. "The compass, the crystals, this box, they're all connected somehow." Titan had positioned himself between Evelyn and the chapel's entrance, his body language indicating extreme alertness. His ears were pricked forward, and low growls emerged from his throat at regular intervals. Something was approaching the monastery, and judging by his reaction, it wasn't friendly. The sound of horses reached them moments later, multiple riders moving through the valley with the confidence of people familiar with the terrain. But these weren't the same voices they'd heard at the ravine. These men spoke in Spanish, their words carrying clearly in the monastery's acoustic environment. "The woman and the dog have found the sanctuary," one voice reported, "just as the old stories promised." "Then the time has come," replied another, this voice carrying the authority of leadership. "Prepare the documents. If she has proven herself worthy to reach this place, then perhaps she can be trusted with the full truth. And if she proves unworthy, then the mountain will claim her as it has claimed all the others." The conversation sent chills through Evelyn's spine. These weren't treasure hunters or claim jumpers. They spoke with the reverence of people who understood this place's sacred significance. But their words suggested she was being evaluated by standards she didn't understand, with consequences that could prove fatal. Titan's growls had ceased, replaced by an alertness that suggested recognition rather than threat. When the first figure appeared in the chapel doorway, his reaction confirmed what Evelyn was beginning to suspect. These newcomers weren't enemies. The man who entered was elderly, but carried himself with dignity that spoke of authority earned through decades of experience. His clothing was well made but practical, and his weathered features suggested a life spent in mountain environments. Behind him came two younger men, who moved with the careful precision of people accustomed to dangerous situations. "Senora Morrison," the elder said in accented but clear English, "I am Father Miguel Santos, and I have been waiting many years to meet you." "You know who I am?" Evelyn asked, her hand moving instinctively toward the revolver at her side. "We know of your husband's work with Marcus Cross. We know of the dog who chose you as his companion. And we know that your arrival here fulfills prophecies that have been guarded by my order for more than 2 centuries. Father Santos approached the altar with the reverence of someone entering sacred space. "But most importantly, we know that you have proven yourself worthy to learn the truth about what you have discovered." The iron lockbox responded to the priest's presence, its complex mechanisms beginning to move and align without any visible manipulation. As the container opened, it revealed documents that appeared both ancient and perfectly preserved. Maps, contracts, and religious texts that told a story far more complex than simple treasure hunting. The Spanish didn't abandon these mountains, Father Santos explained. "We retreated into sanctuary, waiting for the right person to continue our sacred mission. The treasures you have found aren't wealth to be claimed. They are resources to be protected and used for purposes that transcend individual gain." The documents painted a picture of an organization that had spent centuries accumulating and safeguarding artifacts, knowledge, and wealth that belonged to no single nation or individual. The monastery wasn't just a hiding place. It was the headquarters of an order dedicated to preserving sacred objects until they could be returned to their proper purpose. "Your husband understood this," the priest continued. "Marcus Cross died protecting it. And now, Senora Morrison, you must decide whether you are willing to accept the responsibility that comes with this knowledge." "What kind of responsibility?" she asked, though something in her heart already knew the answer. "To become the next guardian of the mountain's secrets, to protect what has been entrusted to us against those who would use it for selfish purposes. To ensure that when the time comes, these treasures serve God's will rather than man's greed." Titan had moved to stand beside her, his massive presence offering silent support for whatever decision she would make. The dog had guided her to this moment, but the choice of whether to accept her destiny belonged to her alone. Outside the monastery walls, she could hear new voices. The men who had pursued them from the ravine had found the hidden valley. Time was running short, and decisions could no longer be delayed. The final confrontation was approaching, and everything would depend on whether Evelyn Morrison possessed the courage to claim her inheritance as guardian of mysteries that had shaped these mountains for centuries. The iron lockbox gleamed in the chapel's mystical light, its secrets finally revealed to someone deemed worthy of their trust. The truth, when it finally emerged from the iron lockbox, was more extraordinary than anything Evelyn could have imagined. Among the ancient documents lay a jade medallion unlike anything she'd ever seen, not crafted by human hands, but somehow grown from the mountain itself. Its surface pulsed with the same inner light they'd observed in the crystal chamber, and touching it sent waves of energy through her entire body. "This is why Titan chose you," Father Santos said softly. "The medallion responds only to those who carry the bloodline." "What bloodline?" Evelyn asked, though something deep in her memory was stirring. Fragments of stories her grandmother had told about ancestors who had lived in these mountains long before any European settlement. Father Santos lifted another document from the lockbox, this one bearing seals and signatures that spoke of official authority. Your great-grandmother was Maria Esperanza Santos, my sister and the last known descendant of the indigenous people who first discovered these mountains' power. When she married your great-grandfather and took his name, the connection was, and thought, broken forever. The revelation hit Evelyn like a physical blow. The comfortable story of her family's pioneer heritage crumbled as she realized the truth. Her bloodline connected her not just to European settlers, but to the original inhabitants of these mountains, people who had understood and protected their secrets long before Spanish missionaries arrived. The dog knew, she whispered, understanding flooding through her. Titan could sense the connection. Titan is no ordinary animal, Father Santos confirmed. His ancestors were companion spirits to the mountain's first guardians. When the Spanish arrived, the indigenous shamans made a pact. They would share their knowledge in exchange for protection of the sacred sites. The monastery was built as a bridge between two cultures, two ways of understanding the mountain's power. As if responding to the revelation of his true nature, Titan began to change before Evelyn's eyes. His already massive form seemed to expand further, and his dark fur took on an almost supernatural sheen. But the most dramatic transformation was in his eyes. They now glowed with the same inner light as the jade medallion, revealing an intelligence that transcended normal canine awareness. He's been hiding his true nature, she breathed. All this time, he's been protecting me by appearing as just an unusually large dog. The mountain spirits take many forms, Father Santos explained. Titan is the last of his kind, waiting decades for someone of the proper bloodline to claim their inheritance. But Senora Morrison, you must understand, this power comes with terrible responsibilities and equally terrible dangers. The documents in the lockbox told a story that explained everything they'd encountered. The Spanish treasure wasn't just gold and silver. It included artifacts that channeled the mountain's natural energy, items that could locate hidden resources, influence weather patterns, and even affect the thoughts and emotions of those who encountered them. The silver compass was just one example of technology that bridged the gap between natural and supernatural forces. This is why Benjamin Harper's men have been so persistent, she realized. They don't just want treasure, they want power that could reshape the entire territory. Exactly. And they have been guided by someone who understands the true nature of what lies hidden here. Father Santos's expression grew grim. Someone who has been seeking the bloodline guardian for many years, waiting for the right moment to claim both the power and the person capable of wielding it. Before Evelyn could ask for clarification, the sound of approaching voices reached them from outside the monastery. But these weren't the rough shouts of treasure hunters. They carried the authority of men accustomed to command. Mrs. Morrison. The voice belonged to someone she recognized but couldn't immediately place. I know you're in there. We have much to discuss, and I'm afraid your time for choosing has run out. Titan's reaction was immediate and alarming. His hackles rose, and growls emerged from his throat that seemed to shake the monastery's ancient stones. Whatever supernatural senses he possessed were screaming warnings about the approaching figure. You know this voice, Father Santos observed, watching Evelyn's face carefully. I think, yes, it's Samuel Cross, but that's impossible. He's Marcus's brother, Thomas's friend. He helped me understand what was happening. Did he help you, or did he guide you exactly where someone wanted you to go? The terrible possibility dawned on her as footsteps approached the chapel entrance. Samuel Cross appeared in the doorway, but this wasn't the weathered mountain man she'd met at her cabin. This Samuel was well-dressed, confident, and accompanied by armed men who moved with military precision. "Hello, Evelyn," he said with a smile that held no warmth. "I must say, you've exceeded even my highest expectations. Finding this place, activating the medallion, revealing Titan's true nature, you've accomplished in days what has taken me years to orchestrate." "You're not Marcus's brother," she said, understanding flooding through her. "Oh, but I am. I'm just not the grieving family member you assumed me to be." Samuel's mask had fallen completely away, revealing someone who had been playing a complex game from the very beginning. Marcus was weak, you see. He actually believed all this nonsense about sacred responsibilities and protecting treasures for some greater good. I had to remove him from the equation. "You killed your own brother. I eliminated an obstacle to progress. Just as I eliminated your husband when he refused to reveal the location of the Guardian's cache." Samuel stepped further into the chapel, his men flanking him with weapons drawn. "But Thomas did me one final service. He trained that magnificent animal to recognize the bloodline. All I had to do was wait for Titan to choose his next guardian, then follow where he led." The jade medallion pulsed more strongly in Evelyn's hand, and she felt power flowing through her that she didn't understand, but somehow knew how to use. The mountain itself seemed to be responding to her emotional state, and the chapel's atmosphere grew charged with energy that made the air itself shimmer. "You made one mistake, Samuel," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "You assumed that having the bloodline meant I could be controlled or manipulated like the artifacts you've been collecting. Can't you be?" His confident smile wavered slightly as he noticed the change in the chapel's atmosphere. Titan's growl had grown so deep it seemed to emerge from the mountain itself, and his eyes now blazed with supernatural fire. But more significantly, he was no longer alone. Shapes were materializing in the chapel's shadows, other spirits, other guardians that had been waiting for their time to return. "The mountain has been patient," Father Santos said quietly, "but patience has its limits. You've awakened forces that have been sleeping for generations, Mr. Cross, forces that don't distinguish between bloodline guardians and those who would exploit their power." Samuel's confidence finally cracked as he realized the magnitude of what he'd set in motion. His carefully laid plans had brought him to the source of unimaginable power, but they had also awakened guardians whose loyalty couldn't be bought or coerced. The final confrontation was beginning, and Evelyn Morrison, descendant of mountain shamans, widow of a treasure hunter, and chosen guardian of ancient secrets, stood at its center with powers she was only beginning to understand, and responsibilities that would define the rest of her life. The jade medallion blazed with inner fire, and the mountain itself prepared to reveal the full extent of what it had been protecting for centuries. The chapel filled with supernatural energy as Evelyn grasped the jade medallion and felt the full power of her inheritance flowing through her veins. The ancient walls began to resonate with harmonics that seemed to emerge from the mountain's very core, and carved symbols throughout the monastery blazed with inner light as dormant systems awakened after centuries of sleep. But Samuel Cross was not a man to be intimidated by supernatural displays. "Impressive theatrics," he said, signaling his men to raise their weapons. "But you're still just one woman with a dog, no matter how unusual that dog might be. I have 12 armed men and the backing of territorial authorities who will legitimize whatever claims I make here. You have no idea what you're dealing with," Father Santos warned, moving to stand beside Evelyn. "The guardianship isn't just a title, it's a bond with forces that have protected these mountains since before recorded history." As if to emphasize his words, the monastery's bells began tolling despite no visible hand setting them in motion. The sound echoed across the hidden valley and into the passages beyond, carrying a message that reached every creature and spirit within miles of the sacred site. Titan had grown even larger, his form now clearly more spirit than flesh. His eyes blazed with supernatural fire, and when he moved, shadows seemed to dance around him like living things. But he wasn't acting alone. Other shapes were materializing throughout the chapel, translucent figures that carried the unmistakable, a presence of the mountain's previous guardians, the spirits of those who came before, Evelyn whispered, recognizing in their faces the same features she saw in old photographs of her grandmother. They never really left. They were waiting, Father Santos confirmed, waiting for the bloodline to return, for someone worthy to claim the full inheritance of the mountain's power. Samuel's confidence was visibly shaking as he counted the growing number of supernatural presences surrounding them. His men, hardened frontier fighters accustomed to human opponents, shifted nervously as temperatures in the chapel began dropping and the very air grew thick with otherworldly energy. But Samuel Cross hadn't achieved his position through cowardice. "Ghosts don't stop bullets," he declared, raising his own revolver. "And ancient curses don't prevent legal ownership. I'll deal with your spirits after I've claimed what I came for." The jade medallion pulsed in Evelyn's hand, and suddenly she could hear voices, whispers in languages both familiar and strange, carrying knowledge that had been accumulating in this place for countless generations. She understood now that her role wasn't just to protect treasure, but to serve as a bridge between the human and spirit worlds. "You want the mountain's treasures?" she asked Samuel, her voice carrying new authority. "Then let the mountain itself decide who deserves them." She pressed the medallion against the ancient altar, and the chapel exploded with light. But this wasn't the harsh illumination of fire or electricity. It was the soft, living radiance of natural forces awakening after long dormancy. Every surface in the monastery began glowing with symbols that told the complete story of the mountain's guardianship. The wooden staff that appeared in her hands seemed to materialize from the chapel's altar itself, as if the sacred wood had been waiting centuries for her touch. Its surface was carved with intricate designs that matched the jade medallion, and when she grasped it, the connection between herself and the mountain became complete. "The staff of the first guardian," Father Santos breathed. "I thought it was lost forever when the Spanish were forced to retreat." "Nothing is ever truly lost here," Evelyn replied, understanding flooding through her as ancient memories awakened. "The mountain remembers everything, every guardian, every treasure, every person who has sought its secrets with pure or corrupt intentions." Samuel's men were backing toward the chapel entrance, their weapons wavering as supernatural phenomena increased around them. Winds from no earthly source swirled through the closed space, carrying scents of pine forests and ancient ceremonies. The floor beneath their feet began emanating warmth that pulsed in rhythm with a heartbeat larger than any human heart. But Samuel himself stood firm, his eyes fixed on the staff in Evelyn's hands with an intensity that bordered on madness. "I've spent 20 years planning this moment," he said through gritted teeth. "I won't be denied by parlor tricks and Indian superstitions." "These aren't tricks," Father Santos warned. "You're witnessing the mountain's judgment, and it finds you lacking in every measure that matters." The spirit guardians had formed a circle around the chapel, their translucent forms growing more solid with each passing moment. Evelyn could see her great-grandmother among them, a woman whose face she recognized from childhood dreams, but had never understood. The spirit nodded approvingly and gestured toward Samuel with an expression of profound sadness. "She says you've been marked by the mountain for judgment," Evelyn told Samuel, somehow understanding the spirit's wordless communication. "Your brother Marcus tried to warn you, tried to show you the proper way to approach these sacred places. But greed and ambition corrupted your heart beyond redemption." Samuel's response was to cock his revolver and aim it directly at Evelyn's heart. "Enough mystical nonsense. You're coming with me, along with that medallion and staff. I'll sort out the supernatural complications later." But as his finger tightened on the trigger, Titan stepped between them. The great dog had assumed his full spiritual form, towering nearly 6 feet at the shoulder and radiating protective energy that made the chapel stones vibrate with harmonic resonance. When Samuel fired, The bullet passed harmlessly through, Titan's supernatural body, and embedded itself in the wall behind them. "You can't kill what was never entirely alive," Evelyn said, finally understanding the truth about her companion. "Titan is a mountain spirit given physical form to guide and protect the Guardians. He's been waiting decades for me to claim my inheritance so he could reveal his true nature." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from outside the monastery. Not the heavy boots of Samuel's remaining men, but the lighter tread of people moving with purpose and reverence. Martha Webb's voice called out across the valley, accompanied by other voices from Silver Creek settlement. "Evelyn Morrison, we saw the lights and heard the bells. Are you all right in there?" "The townspeople," Father Santos observed with satisfaction. "The mountain called them here. When the guardianship awakens, it sends out a call to all who live under its protection." Samuel's carefully laid plans were crumbling as he realized his isolated confrontation had become a community gathering. Through the chapel windows, Evelyn could see familiar faces from Silver Creek. Martha Webb, her son Joseph, the blacksmith, Tom Riley, and at least a dozen others who had made the dangerous journey into the mountains following some instinct they couldn't name. They felt it too, she realized. The awakening. The mountain is calling its people home. The staff in her hands pulsed with increasing energy, and Evelyn found herself understanding its purpose. This wasn't just a symbol of authority. It was a tool for channeling the mountain's protective power, a way to ensure that the treasures hidden throughout these peaks would serve their intended purpose of helping the community rather than enriching individuals. Samuel was trapped now, surrounded by supernatural guardians inside the chapel and a growing crowd of angry townspeople outside. His remaining men had lost their nerve entirely, dropping their weapons and backing away from phenomena that challenged everything they thought they understood about the world. "You think these farmers and shopkeepers can stop me?" Samuel demanded, but his voice carried the edge of desperation. "I have backing from powerful interests in Denver, territorial authorities who will enforce my claims regardless of what your mountain spirits want." "Your backers in Denver don't know about the mountain's true nature," Father Santos replied calmly. "They sent you here thinking they were investing in ordinary mining claims. When they learn what you've actually awakened, they'll abandon you." Faster than rats leaving a sinking ship, Evelyn raised the staff, and its glow intensified until the entire chapel blazed with supernatural radiance. She could feel the mountain's vast consciousness stirring around her, ancient and patient, but roused to protective action by the threat Samuel represented. "The judgment is beginning," she announced, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to emerge from the stones themselves. "Samuel Cross, you have violated sacred trust, murdered your own brother, and sought to exploit power that was never meant for personal gain. The mountain will decide your fate." The jade medallion in her other hand began resonating with the staff's energy, and suddenly Evelyn could see the entire hidden network of passages, chambers, and sacred sites that honeycombed these peaks. She understood now that the monastery was just one node in a vast system designed to protect and channel natural forces that most people couldn't comprehend. But more importantly, she could see the spiritual threads that connected every person. In the valley to the mountain's protective consciousness, Samuel Cross appeared as a dark void in that network, a corruption that threatened to poison everything it touched. "Look around you," she told him. "Do you see the light that connects every living thing in this place? You appear as darkness, Samuel. The mountain itself rejects your presence." The spirit guardians were moving closer now, their forms becoming more substantial as the staff's power reached full activation. Evelyn's great-grandmother stepped forward and placed a translucent hand on her descendant's shoulder, sharing memories and knowledge that spanned generations of faithful guardianship. Through that contact, Evelyn learned the mountain's most closely guarded secret. The treasures they had discovered were never the true prize. The real power lay in the network of natural energies that the Guardian could access through the staff and medallion. power to heal the land, to ensure abundant harvests, to protect communities from natural disasters and human threats. This is what Thomas and Marcus really discovered, she breathed. Not just gold and silver, but the ability to ensure prosperity and safety for everyone who lives under the mountain's protection. Samuel's eyes widened as he finally understood the magnitude of what he had been trying to steal. That kind of power, it could control entire territories, make kings of ordinary men, or it could ensure that no one in these valleys ever goes hungry, that crops never fail, that communities prosper in harmony with the natural world. Evelyn countered. The choice of how to use such power reveals the true character of whoever wields it. The sound of voices outside was growing louder as more townspeople arrived, drawn by the supernatural beacon blazing from the monastery. But these weren't just residents of Silver Creek. People were coming from settlements throughout the region, following instincts they couldn't explain, but trusted implicitly. "The mountain is calling in all its debts," Father Santos observed. "Every family that has prospered under its protection, every community that has thrived in its shadow. They're all coming to witness the changing of the guard." Samuel made his final desperate play, lunging toward Evelyn with a knife drawn from his boot. But Titan intercepted him effortlessly, the spirit dog's supernatural form expanding to fill half the chapel. When Samuel's blade struck Titan's ethereal body, it passed harmlessly through, while spiritual energy surged back through the weapon, sending Samuel flying across the room. "The judgment is rendered," Evelyn declared, raising both staff and medallion toward the chapel's vaulted ceiling. "Samuel Cross, your crimes against the mountain and its people are known and witnessed. You will leave this place and never return, stripped of all claim to its treasures and forever marked as one who chose corruption over service." The jade medallion blazed with final authority, and Samuel screamed as some essential part of his being was burned away. When the light faded, he stood diminished, no longer the confident manipulator who had orchestrated years of schemes, but a broken man whose connection to the mountain's power had been severed permanently. His remaining followers helped him to his feet and began the long retreat from the monastery, knowing they would never again be welcome in these sacred mountains. The threat that had driven Evelyn into hiding was neutralized, but greater challenges lay ahead as she prepared to assume the full responsibilities of guardianship. Outside, the voices of her community called her name, ready to welcome their newly awakened protector and learn how their lives would change under the guidance of someone who could channel the mountain's ancient power. The staff pulsed with patient energy, and Titan, now revealed in his full spiritual glory, stood ready to begin the next phase of their partnership. The proving ground had tested her worthiness, and Evelyn Morrison had emerged as the rightful guardian of mysteries that would reshape not just her own destiny, but the future of everyone who called these mountains home. The final confrontation erupted with supernatural fury as Samuel Cross, stripped of his connection to the mountain's power but driven mad by its loss, made one last desperate attempt to claim what he believed was rightfully his. Drawing a hidden revolver from beneath his coat, he fired wildly at the spirit guardians, the ancient walls, and finally at Evelyn herself. But the chapel had become a nexus of protective energy. Bullets passed harmlessly through spiritual forms, or were deflected by barriers of light that materialized wherever they were needed. Titan, now revealed in his full supernatural magnificence, moved like liquid shadow between Samuel and his target, his ethereal body absorbing attacks that would have been fatal to any mortal defender. "You cannot have it!" Samuel screamed, his voice breaking with hysteria. "I've sacrificed everything, my brother, my soul, 20 years of my life, and I will not be denied by some mountain witch and her spirit dog." The staff in Evelyn's hands blazed with responding power, and she felt the full weight of generations of guardians flowing through her consciousness. Her great-grandmother's spirit stepped forward, placing translucent hands over Evelyn's own. on the ancient wood, sharing knowledge that made everything clear. "The crown," the spirit whispered in a voice like wind through pine needles. "The final test requires the crown." Evelyn understood immediately. Hidden within the monastery's deepest sanctuary lay the ultimate symbol of guardianship, a golden crown that had been worn by every protector of the mountain since the first indigenous shamans had discovered its power. But claiming it would require passing through trials that had claimed the lives of unworthy seekers for centuries. Samuel's remaining men had fled when the supernatural battle began, but the man himself seemed incapable of retreat. He stalked through the chapel, reloading his weapon with shaking hands while muttering about destiny and rightful claims. The mountain's rejection had unhinged his mind, leaving only obsession and rage. "The crown is in the heart chamber," Father Santos warned urgently. "But to reach it you must pass through the trial of worthiness. Many have tried. None who entered with corrupt hearts ever emerged." "And if I don't try?" Evelyn asked, dodging. Another wild shot from Samuel's revolver. "Then the guardianship remains incomplete. The mountain's power stays dormant, and all the communities under its protection remain vulnerable to men like him." Outside the monastery, the voices of townspeople grew more urgent as they sensed the spiritual battle raging within the ancient walls. Martha Webb's voice rose above the others. "Evelyn, whatever's happening in there, we're with you. The whole valley is with you." The knowledge that her community was depending on her gave Evelyn the courage she needed. Grasping the staff more firmly, she began walking toward the chapel's rear wall, where hidden mechanisms responded to the medallion's proximity by revealing a passage that hadn't been opened in decades. "Where are you going?" Samuel demanded, raising his weapon again. "To complete what you tried to steal," she replied. "To become the guardian these mountains deserve." Titan padded beside her as she entered the hidden passage, his supernatural form providing light that revealed walls covered with murals depicting centuries of guardianship ceremonies. The images told stories of men and women who had accepted the mountain's call, using its power to protect their communities from everything from natural disasters to human threats. But they also showed the fate of those who had sought the crown. For selfish purposes, images too disturbing to contemplate, depicting spiritual punishments that made physical death seem merciful by comparison. The passage opened into a circular chamber where natural formations of crystal and precious metals created a cathedral that humbled even the monastery's grandest spaces. At its center, on a pedestal of living rock, sat the golden crown that represented ultimate guardianship. But between Evelyn and her goal lay the trial itself, a gauntlet of spiritual challenges that would test every aspect of her character, courage and commitment to service over self. The first test manifested as a figure blocking her path, Thomas Morrison, her beloved husband, appearing exactly as he had in life, but with eyes that held infinite sadness. "Evelyn," his familiar voice carried across the chamber, "why do you seek power that will separate you from everything you've ever known? Stay with me instead. We can be together always in this place where death has no meaning." The temptation was overwhelming. After 2 years of loneliness and struggle, the chance to be reunited with the man she'd loved more than life itself made her heart ache with desperate longing. But touching the jade medallion reminded her of the responsibilities she'd accepted, and the community depending on her courage. "I love you, Thomas," she whispered, "but I won't abandon my duties for even the sweetest dream." The vision of her husband smiled with infinite pride before dissolving into points of light that swirled around the chamber like blessing stars. The second test came as Samuel Cross burst into the chamber behind her, his face twisted with rage and his weapon raised. But this wasn't the broken man from the chapel. This was Samuel, as he might have been, strong and confident and offering partnership in claiming the mountain's treasures. "We could share this power," he said in a voice that carried none of the madness that had consumed the real Samuel. "Think what we could accomplish together. bringing prosperity to entire territories, reshaping the frontier according to our vision. At what cost? Evelyn asked, though part of her was tempted by the vision of unlimited good they could accomplish. At the cost of a few outdated traditions and superstitions. The mountain's power belongs to those strong enough to claim it, not to ancient spirits clinging to obsolete ways. But even as he spoke, she could see the corruption creeping into his idealized form, the way his eyes grew cold when he spoke of power, the dismissive gesture he made toward the sacred images surrounding them. This test was about recognizing that even good intentions could be corrupted by the wrong motivations. Power belongs to those who serve, not to those who would be served, she replied, and this vision too dissolved into harmless light. The final test was the cruelest, a reflection of herself as she might become if she claimed the crown for the wrong reasons. The figure that appeared wore the same face and clothing, but her eyes held the coldness of absolute authority, and her voice carried the ring of unquestionable command. You could end all suffering in these mountains, her dark reflection said. No more poverty, no more want, no more freedom to make wrong choices. Perfect order under perfect guidance. Isn't that what a guardian should provide? Not if it means destroying what makes life worth living, Evelyn replied, understanding the final lesson. The mountain's power is meant to support and protect, not to control and command. With that realization, the golden crown began to glow with inner radiance, and the chamber filled with the presence of every guardian who had come before. Their approval washed over her like warm sunlight, and she knew she had proven herself worthy of the trust they were placing in her hands. But as she reached for the crown, the real Samuel Cross burst into the chamber, his madness complete, and his final bullets aimed at the heart of everything he blamed for his failure. Samuel's final bullets shattered against barriers of pure light as Evelyn claimed the golden crown, and with it the full power of her inheritance as guardian of the mountain's ancient mysteries. The moment the circlet touched her brow, the chamber exploded with radiance that reached beyond physical sight into realms of spiritual truth. The crown wasn't just ornamental. It was a conduit that connected her consciousness directly to the mountain's vast network of natural energies. Through that connection, she could feel every living thing within 50 miles, the townspeople gathered outside the monastery, the wildlife in distant valleys, even the trees and streams that formed the region's ecological web. But more than awareness, the crown granted her authority over forces that had shaped these peaks since the world was young. She could sense underground rivers and direct their flow, feel approaching storms and influence their path, detect the precious metals and gems hidden in the earth, and choose whether to reveal or conceal their locations. This is what you wanted, isn't it, Samuel? She asked, turning to face the man who had orchestrated so much death and suffering in pursuit of power he could never have wielded safely. The ability to reshape the world according to your will. Samuel's eyes widened as he saw the transformation that had come over her. The crown blazed with inner fire, and her entire being radiated an authority that made his desperate threats seem pitiful by comparison. That power should be mine, he snarled, raising his empty revolver as if it could still pose a threat. I earned it with sacrifice and dedication. I planned and schemed and eliminated obstacles for 20 years, and that's exactly why it can never be yours, Evelyn replied sadly. The mountain doesn't reward ambition or ruthlessness, Samuel. It responds only to those who seek to serve rather than to rule. She raised the staff, and its connection to the crown created a resonance that filled the chamber with harmonics of pure creation. The crystal formations around them began singing in response, their voices joining in a symphony that had been building for centuries. But I can offer you something better than power, she continued. I can offer you redemption. The bare heartstone materialized in her free hand, a crystal of perfect clarity that pulsed with the same rhythm as a human heart. This was the mountain's final gift to its chosen guardian, the ability to heal even the deepest spiritual corruption, to restore the connection between human consciousness and natural harmony. All you have to do is accept that your way was wrong, she said, extending the crystal toward Samuel. Acknowledge the pain you've caused, genuinely repent for your crimes, and the mountain will forgive even you. For a moment, something almost human flickered in Samuel's eyes. The madness cleared enough for him to see the full scope of what he'd become. A man who had murdered his own brother, destroyed innocent lives, and corrupted everything he touched in pursuit of goals that had brought him nothing but misery. I could, he began, reaching tentatively toward the heartstone, but then his hand stopped and the madness returned with redoubled fury. No, I refuse to grovel before mountain spirits and Indian superstitions. I am Samuel Cross, and I take what I want. He lunged toward her, hands reaching for the crown with desperate strength. But Titan intercepted him in mid-leap, the spirit dog's supernatural form expanding to fill half the chamber as he absorbed Samuel's final attack into his ethereal being. What emerged from that contact wasn't physical violence, but spiritual judgment. Samuel found himself face to face with every person he'd harmed, every life he'd destroyed in his quest for power. Marcus Cross stood among them, not with accusation, but with infinite sadness for the brother who had chosen corruption over compassion. I'm sorry, Marcus's spirit whispered. I tried to show you a better way, but you couldn't hear me over the sound of your own ambition. The weight of truth broke something fundamental in Samuel's mind. He collapsed to his knees, no longer the confident manipulator who had orchestrated complex schemes, but a broken man who finally understood the true cost of his choices. The mountain offers mercy even now, Evelyn said gently, still holding the heartstone, but it can't force you to accept it. The choice has to be yours. Samuel looked up at her with eyes that held decades of accumulated pain. For just an instant, she thought he might choose redemption over destruction, but then he shook his head with finality. I'd rather be damned on my own terms than saved on anyone else's, he said. Keep your forgiveness, Mountain Witch. I reject it all. With those words, he triggered his own spiritual exile. The chamber's light rejected his presence, and he began fading like smoke in sunlight, not dying, but being removed from the mountains, a protection forever, condemned to wander the world as an outcast from the natural order he had chosen to defy. His last words echoed in the crystal chamber. This isn't over. There are others who seek what you've claimed, and they won't be as easily defeated. Then he was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of sulfur and corruption. Evelyn stood alone in the chamber with Titan, wearing the crown of guardianship and holding the staff that connected her to powers beyond imagination. The trials were complete, the threats neutralized, and her transformation into the mountain's chosen protector was finally accomplished. But as Samuel's warning echoed in her memory, she knew this victory was just the beginning. The mountain had chosen her not just to guard its treasures, but to protect all the communities that depended on its bounty. And somewhere beyond these peaks, other forces were already stirring in response to the power she'd awakened, the heart. Stone pulsed in her hand, reminding her that redemption remained possible for anyone willing to accept it. But first, she had a community of frightened people waiting outside the monastery, needing reassurance that their newly awakened guardian would use her power wisely. Titan, now bonded to her permanently through the crown's magic, padded beside her as they began the journey back to the world above, a world that would never be quite the same now that the mountain's ancient guardian had finally claimed her inheritance. 6 months after the awakening at the monastery, Silver Creek Valley had transformed into something that visiting travelers found difficult to believe. The harsh, unforgiving landscape that had challenged settlers for decades now bloomed with unprecedented fertility. Crops grew larger and more abundant than anyone could remember. Springs that had run dry for years bubbled with fresh water, and Even the wildest game seemed drawn to the valley as if seeking sanctuary. Evelyn Morrison, though she would always think of herself as simply Evelyn, had grown into her role as guardian with the same quiet determination she'd brought to every challenge in her life. The golden crown remained hidden beneath her simple clothing, its power manifesting not in grand displays, but in the subtle ways she could now sense the needs of everyone under the mountain's protection. The memorial stone she'd commissioned for the monastery grounds bore simple inscriptions: Thomas Morrison, he sought truth in stone and spirit; Marcus Cross, he died protecting sacred trust; and Samuel Cross, he chose his own path. Father Santos had objected to including Samuel's name, but Evelyn insisted that even cautionary tales deserved remembrance. Forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, she'd explained. Sometimes the best way to honor the victims is to remember honestly why they suffered. Martha Webb had become her closest advisor in managing the delicate balance between spiritual responsibilities and practical community needs. The two women met every morning on Evelyn's front porch, rebuilt and expanded to accommodate the frequent visitors who sought the Guardian's counsel, to discuss everything from crop rotation schedules to marriage disputes. Young Joseph Hartley wants to marry the Peterson girl, Martha reported on this particular autumn morning, consulting her ever-present notebook. But their families have been feuding since that boundary dispute 3 years ago. What does the mountain tell you? Evelyn asked, a question that would have seemed absurd 6 months ago, but had become their standard approach to solving complex problems. Martha closed her eyes and felt for the subtle currents of harmony and discord that the Guardian had taught her to perceive. They belong together, she said after a moment. The land itself approves of the match, but the families need a face-saving way to end their stubbornness. Then we'll give them one, Evelyn decided. The harvest festival is next week. We'll announce that the mountain has blessed their union, and community pressure will handle the rest. Such conversations would have struck her former self as presumptuous interference in private affairs. But the Guardian's role required active participation in maintaining the social harmony that allowed the mountain's power to flow freely. Discord and hatred created spiritual blockages that could affect everything from weather patterns to crop yields. Titan, now permanently bonded to her through the Heartstone's magic, spent his days patrolling the valley's perimeter in his supernatural form. To most residents, he still appeared as an unusually large and intelligent dog, but Evelyn could see his true nature, a spirit of protection that moved between the physical and ethereal worlds, watching for threats that ranged from natural disasters to human dangers. This morning, his behavior indicated visitors approaching from the Eastern Trail. Evelyn felt them too, through her connection to the mountain's awareness. 3 riders moving with the careful respect that suggested they understood they were entering sacred territory. Representatives from the territorial government, she told Martha, recognizing the spiritual signatures of men carrying official authority. They're here about the mining claims. The paperwork had been arriving for months. Legal challenges to her ownership of various properties, surveys commissioned by distant investors, and formal complaints about supernatural interference with legitimate business operations. Samuel Cross's backers in Denver hadn't abandoned their interests just because their primary agent had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. But Evelyn had spent these months learning to use more than spiritual power in protecting the mountain's secrets. Father Santos had introduced her to other guardians, men and women throughout the Western Territories who served similar roles in their own sacred places. Through their network, she'd gained access to lawyers, politicians, and business leaders who understood that some things were more valuable than immediate profit. The 3 riders who emerged from the forest carried themselves with the dignity of men accustomed to respect, but their approach to her cabin showed none of the arrogance that had marked Samuel's followers. The leader, a distinguished gentleman in his 50s, dismounted carefully and waited for her invitation before stepping onto her property. "Mrs. Morrison," he said with a slight bow, "I'm Judge William Harrison from the Territorial Court in Denver. These are my associates, Mr. Franklin and Mr. Davis from the Bureau of Land Management. We've come to discuss certain irregularities that have been reported regarding mineral claims in this region." "You're welcome here," Evelyn replied, gesturing toward the chairs she kept ready for such visits, "though I suspect you've come to tell me that my ownership of these lands isn't recognized by territorial law." Judge Harrison's expression suggested surprise at her directness. "Actually, Mrs. Morrison, quite the opposite. Our investigation has revealed that your family's claims to these properties date back far longer than we initially understood. Spanish land grants, indigenous tribal agreements, and federal treaties create a legal framework that supersedes any recent mining claims." The revelation shouldn't have surprised her. The mountain's power extended to ensuring that legal as well as spiritual protections remained strong. But hearing official confirmation still brought relief. More importantly, the judge continued, reports from this valley describe agricultural and economic improvements that have impressed officials throughout the territory. Whatever methods you're using to revitalize this region, the government would like to see them expanded to other areas. The methods aren't easily transferable, she said carefully. They depend on understanding each place's unique characteristics and respecting the natural forces that shape local conditions. You mean the supernatural phenomena that have been reported? Mr. Franklin asked. Our investigators documented some unusual occurrences during their survey work. Evelyn sensed no hostility in the question, only genuine curiosity. These men had been chosen specifically because they could accept extraordinary explanations for extraordinary results. The indigenous people, who first lived in these mountains, understood things that European settlers often overlooked, she replied. I've simply learned to work with natural forces instead of fighting against them. The conversation continued for hours, covering everything from water rights to wildlife management to the educational programs she'd established for local children. By afternoon, the three officials were clearly convinced that whatever was happening in Silver Creek Valley deserved protection rather than interference. We'll be recommending that these lands receive special territorial status, Judge Harrison announced as they prepared to leave. Protected from commercial exploitation while remaining under your stewardship. The legal framework exists, we just need to apply it properly. As evening approached and the officials began their journey back to Denver, Evelyn sat on her porch with Martha and watched the sun set behind peaks that no longer seemed harsh and forbidding. The mountain's presence in her consciousness had become as natural as breathing, a constant awareness of the web of life that connected every creature in these valleys. Do you ever regret it? Martha asked. The life you had to give up when you accepted all this responsibility? Evelyn considered the question seriously. The simple existence she'd known before finding Titan felt like a dream from someone else's life. She would never again be just another frontier widow struggling to survive until the next growing season. The crown's power came with obligations that would last the rest of her life and beyond. I regret the loneliness sometimes, she admitted, but I've gained something I never expected. The knowledge that every choice I make can improve the lives of hundreds of people. That's not a burden, Martha. It's a privilege. Titan padded up the porch steps and settled beside her chair, his massive head resting against her knee. In his eyes, she could see approval and contentment the Great Spirit had waited decades for. A guardian worthy of the mountain's trust, and his patience had finally been rewarded. The memorial stone caught the last rays of sunlight, its inscription serving as a reminder that every generation faced the choice between service and selfishness, between protecting what mattered and exploiting what was vulnerable. Samuel Cross had chosen poorly and paid the price for his corruption, but tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to prove that the mountain's power could serve the highest good. Evelyn Morrison, guardian of ancient secrets and protector of modern communities, was ready for whatever the future might hold. The auction at Harper's had been just the beginning of an adventure that would last the rest of her life. And looking at the thriving valley below, feeling the contentment of people living in harmony with forces greater than themselves, she knew that every difficult step of the journey had been worthwhile. The mountain had chosen well, and she would spend the rest of her life proving worthy of that trust.